Exercise 1. Digital media seem to promise that media texts circulate faster, more cheaply, and more broadly than ever before, leading to utopian accounts that imagine the potential for television shows or movies to be available anywhere. This is the promise articulated by digital utopians such as Chris Anderson, who argued in The Long Tail that media aggregators would thrive on selling niche content rather than focusing solely on blockbuster hits. Even though digital storage costs are relatively minimal compared with other methods of distribution, allowing retailers to store titles that are purchased only a few times a month, Anderson's argument generally understates the production costs required to make a feature-length film or ongoing televised or web series. And although a number of niche films have found an audience online, the persistent availability of movies through different VOD, video-on-demand services, has altered their value, often with the result that consumers have felt less urgency to own copies of individual films, taking away one of the primary sources of income for movie makers, a situation that has been especially damaging to independent producers. Exercise 2. The underlying imagery of burnout has an immediacy and accessibility which captures an increasingly common experience. Something has gone wrong in people's relationship to their work. The basic narrative goes like this. People entered a job with positive expectations, enthusiasm, and the goal to be successful. Over time, things changed, and now people have a deep sense of exhaustion, feelings of frustration, anger, and cynicism, and a sense of ineffectiveness and failure. The initial flame has burned out. The experience hurts both personal and social functioning on the job, and thus carries some real costs for the individual worker, for the people affected by him or her, and for the organization as a whole. Although some people may quit the job as a result of burnout, others will stay but will only do the bare minimum rather than their very best. What emerges from this narrative is the centrality of people's motivation to achieve. They bring dedication, effort, and commitment to their work, and want to do well and to take pride in their accomplishments. The erosion of those noble qualities is what is represented by burnout. Exercise 3. For a long time, African culture has been used and seen as a non-developmental force, maintaining and sometimes establishing a negative status quo, as opposed to being a progressive and enlightening force. The negative or shadow side of culture has been used and popularized more than the positive one. This is one of the reasons why, for one reason, I am a strong critic of tribal groupings, which, in my opinion, mostly promote tribalism. To me, most of them are not being used as wheels of the positive cultural revival as they claim. Dancing, wearing traditional regalia, and reviving cultural rituals and practices that may have since become irrelevant in the name of reclaiming identity will not do in the midst of the challenges facing the modern world. Most tribal associations are one of the manifestations of the negative face of culture. Their inherent blood is thicker than merit mentality, which is the essence of tribalism, is a great obstacle to development and progress. Exercise 4. One of the features of philosophy as a subject which may horrify the teacher of the subject is that it has a far wider sense than academic philosophy. It is fun to look in the philosophy section in libraries and bookshops, since a large number of books which one finds there have little or nothing to do with academic philosophy at all. In most bookshops in North America and Europe today, the sections on philosophy are smaller than the sections often next to them on mind and spirituality. There is a great deal of interest in issues of spirituality in the fin de siècle world. Now, it might be thought that this has nothing to do with philosophy. It is just a series of vague and rambling thoughts about how one might live one's life and how that relates to the meaning of existence. It all seems to be very subjective, with little argument or analysis. the sort of thing that much philosophy has traditionally opposed. Yet in the mind of the public, this is what philosophy is primarily about, and the public is not entirely wrong here. Exercise 5. Consumer fairness can help explain a number of economic phenomena. Daniel Kahneman, Jack Knetsch, and Richard Thaler argued that concerns about fairness effectively prevented firms from maximizing profits. In one survey, the vast majority of respondents regarded a firm that would raise shovel prices after a snowstorm as engaging in unfair behavior. In another survey, respondents were told about a landlord whose rising costs forced him to raise the rent on a poor tenant, even though the increase might force the tenant to move. 75% of respondents found the action to be unfair. While consumers do not begrudge firms a profit motive, they do not like profits to come at the expense of people. Respondents viewed salary cuts undertaken by a struggling company as fair, but unfair when imposed by a profitable company. Ultimately, consumer fairness flows from a dual entitlement principle that binds both buyers and sellers. Buyers believe they are entitled to a purchase price roughly comparable to a reference transaction, or a transaction that recently occurred within both the firm's and its customers' community, or frame of reference. Sellers, meanwhile, are entitled to a profit within the limits of the reference transaction. Exercise 6. Reflection and reflecting are a psychologist's favorite words, and with good reason. A reflective person has access to his inner motives, feelings, and thoughts, and is able to see the psychological connection between them and his actions. Because he's keeping an eye on his dark side, he's better able to keep it in check. For instance, he'll recognize that the aversion he feels toward his coworker isn't actually because she's supposedly unfriendly, it's because of the envy he feels at her success. By seeing this in himself, he will likely conclude that it really wouldn't be fair to target this person. Chances are good he'll behave amicably toward her and manage to regulate his green-eyed monster internally. Because he has access to his feelings of envy and inferiority, he also has the ability to sway these feelings in a more positive direction. Were he unable to admit that his coworker's success rubbed his ego the wrong way, he may have felt tempted to attack her, if only with a few verbal jabs to cut her down, even in front of others. Exercise 7. Laughter and humor have long puzzled thinkers and theorists, largely because they are subjective. Thomas Hobbes theorized that laughter is primarily a form of cruelty, by which one asserts superiority over others. Twain believed it to be one of mankind's most potent weapons against the despair of the human condition. Freud believed humor and laughter serve as relief valves that jettison the anxieties that build in the human psyche, which grants humor the ability to heal psychological trauma. Others have posited humor is produced by incongruity, by identifying the way that things should be against the way things are. Thus, context becomes important in humor, because what is incongruous in one culture might be normal in another. The divergent views on the uses of humor illustrate the complexity of writing about such a topic, a complexity amplified by the accuracy of each divergent view. Exercise 8. Practicing Stoicism helps us develop the tools to deal as effectively as humanly possible with whatever kicks and punches life throws at us. No matter what happens in our lives, we're ready for anything. We're prepared to take hooks and sidekicks, never give up, and make the best of it. This is the promise of Stoic philosophy. Yet right now, if you get punched in the face, what's going to happen? You get emotional. Like everybody else, you either angrily fight back or, more likely, you start crying. The Stoics identified strong emotions as our ultimate weakness, especially when we let them dictate our behavior. They're toxic to eudaimonia, and they're at the root of all human suffering. Unfortunately, according to the Stoics, most of us are enslaved to passions, strong negative emotions such as irrational fear, grief, or anger. This is why so many of us are miserable. We're far away from being a tower of strength. We're far away from being on good terms with our ideal self. Our passions cause us to act far beneath of what we're capable of. Exercise 9. In general, social psychological theory proposes that although behavior certainly leads to objective consequences, the interpretation of these consequences by the individual has enormous influence on the person's intention to perform the behavior in the future, i.e., reinforce the behavior. Peer and family opinions are also important. These constitute the construct of social norms. Other social, environmental, and cultural forces also exist. However, psychologist Harry Triandis suggests that for any given individual, even such external factors as culture and social situations influence behavior because they are internalized by each individual. Thus, culture and social situations exist not only out there, but also in here, as subjective culture and subjective social situations that serve as mental maps that guide individuals' behavior by influencing their values, norms, roles, and so forth. All in all, then, a person's perception of the world appears to be a powerful influence on behavior. Exercise 10. Modeling after someone works, but remember that success is a mind formula. When modeling after someone else, you must realize that you still have to make sacrifices and do all the hard work yourself. Do not get relaxed and think something is going to be easy because you are modeling after someone else. When we are on the outside looking in, it may appear as if it does not require much to achieve a goal. We think about a stand-up comedian doing a skit on stage. Sometimes we think within, they're not that funny. I could do better than that. This is easy to assume until you look into it and find out the work does not even begin when you get on stage. Not only will you find out that you have to tell jokes, you will realize that you must write skits, be a promoter, etc. Once some people know all of this, they would stop. Always remind yourself that success is more than what meets the eye. Exercise 11. In history, some bosses were vilified as the architects of much evil of their time, and truly they were. But such bosses never operate alone. No large-scale evil can be perpetrated in a society by one man without evil being in the minds of so many of its people. The many must have come to accept the evil acts as pardonable, as they had become necessary in their conscience. Yes, such bosses might be working with a minority, but when a minority lords it over the majority, then the minority is the effective majority. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "A man is not worth living who is not ready to die for what he believes in." Thus, whatever happens is consciously or unconsciously accepted by the society that lives with it rather than bear the consequences of confronting it. Therefore, a person of any character can be the boss as long as the collective feelings of his society deem it fit. Exercise 12. The cultural area is where the sky is truly the limit in regard to music. There are countless examples. Music is a wonderful avenue to introduce cultures from around the world. The many recordings depicting the traditional music of each culture are readily available for teachers to add to their collection. Also, musical recordings of the various instruments from countries around the world provide children with an auditory and visual representation of culture. It is important to include an equitable balance of multicultural materials in the classroom to ensure that each child's heritage is represented and all children are exposed to the heritage of other cultures. Today, the holistic classroom method draws and builds upon what the child already knows, engaging the child, since one learns best when passion and interaction are at play. And also addressing the needs of the whole child. Learning begins with the whole, progresses through to analysis of the parts, and finishes full circle with the whole picture.